we'll let you all get to it. Professor, I'll come back on video when you have 10 minutes left just to let you know what the audience Q&A questions are, but you can take it from here.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'm sorry, this was one thing I was going to remember, which is to close
Looks
out.
like Doug has a question.
Oh, Doug.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can hear me. I can't anybody said on my end. My connection.
Yeah, your connection's coming through a little bit choppy.
Yeah, Doug, I can hear you. You're coming kind of in and out, like a little bit.
If it's easier for you, Doug, and it helps with your audio, you're welcome to try off camera as you wait for like your internet stability to get back to like a good place. But you know, whatever is best for you. Sometimes signing in and out can also be helpful. I know tech is rough for all of us in this world, so don't stress about it. Okay.
Is it okay to get started, or are we gonna kind of?
Maybe on my phone.
Okay.
I can't hear anything worse.
Okay. Okay, I think he said that we can go ahead and get started, Professor, while he signs in on his phone.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Megan. Hello, folks at home. Welcome to the first panel of the day. I am Professor Courtlyn Jones here at The Ohio State University, Moritz College of Law. I teach and write in all areas of the workplace, and I am just thrilled to be here and to get to moderate this panel and have a really rich discussion with my two panelists. Today, we're going to kick off the day of speakers with a discussion topic that I'm sure you will see come up in other panels as well. I think it's pervasive through every topic really that we outlined today. And it really has to do with work's intersection with other social justice initiatives, specifically racial and climate justice. Very quickly, I'll just give you when we think of work, right, and organized workers and labor unions and labor movement, probably the concept of economic rights comes into your head. Perhaps economic justice is in the front of your mind. And that is all correct, right? But we are going to be talking today about how organized labor, other organizations who are doing mobility work, how they've championed other social programs, other social causes, and some of the challenges that come up in doing so. So I will very, very briefly introduce our panelists, but then I will ask them to supplement my introduction if I miss anything. And please also, maybe I might ask them to tell me a little bit about, in addition to what I missed in their intro, if you wouldn't mind sharing what your day-to-day looks like in the work you do, what kinds of instances have you experienced, and maybe even what drew you to this work and how you got started, in case people are wondering. So first up, we have Colette Pichon-Battle. She is a lawyer. She is also the founder of the executive director of the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy, which develops programming focused on equitable disaster recovery, global migration, community economic development, climate justice, and energy democracy. And I think we gave you these wonderful bios, so I won't read them verbatim. I just will note that, you know, Pichon-Battle, she is, she is an Obama Fellow. She is also a member of the Movement for Black Lives Policy Table leadership team, leading that advance in national work in climate justice. And I hope I don't embarrass her by saying that she also has a great TED Talk online. So if you are bored and you are looking to be entertained, you will be more than entertained by just looking up and watching that. We also have Doug Tansy joining us all the way from Alaska. Thanks for being here, Doug. He is the Assistant Business Manager of the IBEW Local 1547 in Fairbanks, Alaska. Doug is born and raised in Alaska. He is both Alaska. Oh man, I practiced the other one so much that I messed up the easy. Athabaskan and Tlingit. And he has started his construction career with the union that he now works for now and has been there for his whole career. In his work with the union, he is working on workforce development. That's been one of his major priorities, especially in the rural community with the indigenous people of the beautiful state of Alaska. So we have quite a panel for you here today. Obviously, I'm still here and will chime in because I can't help myself sometimes, but I will now kick it off to our panels. Please tell me what I missed about your day today. What do I not see in your bio? What is your day, what is your work like and what got you involved in it?
Well, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and get started. As you mentioned, my name is Doug Tansy. I am half Athabasca and half Tlingit, Alaska Native from here, the interior of Alaska. I started my career in construction with the IBEW, went through a construction apprenticeship to become an inside wireman. I had an opportunity to work through the trade, going through construction, escalating up, and currently my role as the assistant business manager for the IBEW here in Alaska. I spend most of my time negotiating contracts, resolving grievances, disputes, as well as workforce development and our apprenticeship training. I am a trustee for the Fairbanks Pipeline Training Center, which does collaborative work with many crafts to do the training for the pipeline work on the North Slope of Alaska, as well as our power linemen, inside wiremen, and telecommunications apprenticeship. I also, through my role in work, have learned quite a bit and have taken a not a political position, but I have a very large political role within our local politics as well as in the state and congressional delegation down in Juneau and DC.
Great, thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug. Peace, great to meet you, and peace, Dr. Courtlyn. Such an honor to be here. As was mentioned, I'm Colette Pichon-Battle, and I'm calling in from Southeast Louisiana, a traditional Choctaw territory, just outside of New Orleans, in Slidell, Louisiana. And I think, you pretty much caught it. The only thing to say now is that I'm from the bayous of South Louisiana, and, was raised in the very natural setting of the unique ecosystem of South Louisiana. I'm from a family that has been where we are since before America was America. And so there's a real claim to the place, not just the issues, but the place and the people. And that's really, it means a lot to me. It informs a lot of how I move. It's Lent, it's Friday. That means it's crawfish time today. So for many folks down here, this Friday is a good day. And it also really connects to the traditions, right? The traditions of this place that are being impacted by climate change, our food systems, our water systems, the very land we live on. The things that make Louisiana this unique place are being threatened by the impacts of the climate crisis. And this wasn't something that I understood intuitively. It took the combination of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and the BP oil drilling disaster in 2010 to really get me to understand that there is both an impact to the fossil fuel economy that Louisiana really highlights. And there are consequences that will not just impact the region, but those consequences impact poor people, Black folks, Indigenous folks in a different way. And so this is really what got me into this start. I started out in corporate law, made it to the whole other side of the game here. For those students who are listening, there's sometimes a calling that happens with that law degree of yours, and you've got to figure out whose side are you fighting for. And that's been my trajectory. And I fight now for my community, for my people, for South Louisiana, for the Gulf South, for Black communities across the globe, and frontline global South communities that are dealing with the climate crisis right now and really trying to figure out what the best next step is for not just our survival, but how we transition to a planet where we can all thrive.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. Let's just go into it. I don't believe in softball questions really. So I'll ask you, Colette and Doug, you're both working in these geographic areas that are uniquely impacted differently, but by climate change, right? And I know there's political initiatives, probably in both, right? To reduce greenhouse gas, to commit to renewable energy, however successful those are. I guess as a person who deals mostly in the workplace, I that scares me, right? Because that's jobs and that's transition, and that I guess I empathize with these people who might be really worried that their jobs are at stake. How do you approach workers who have that very real fear? And I guess a related question is, do we have to choose between the jobs of old and a good, clean environment?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. There's no softballs here. That's that's I like it. I like it. But that's what this comes down to, right? And you know, there's a part of this that we have to acknowledge. We have to acknowledge truth, and we have to acknowledge propaganda. So I think your second question is very, very relevant. Is this the choice? Is this the real choice? Is this a false choice? This gets to really looking at not just what we feel like we know to be true, but also what big oil down here in Louisiana has spent to make the question even called, right? So billions of dollars every year spent on actually putting the words and thoughts in people's head that a transition will mean something quite detrimental. And it is not a proven fact that that is so, but there's enough of a question that with a little bit of energy and some resources, this can be actually what people say over and over again, talking points, challenging points. And so that has to be acknowledged, that there is an air of fear in change. And those of us in South Louisiana know this very well. You know, Katrina was massive change across 3 states, probably more. BP, massive change across 5 states. And it's a fearful space. It's a fearful space to be in, to think about change. I was resistant and reluctant to change. I hated every single person who came down to this region to talk to us about how we needed to change our life. I could have just, I mean, it was terrible. And then there's a reality that sets in. Change is constant. Change is inevitable. And Octavia Butler says change is God. And so if we take this as something not to be afraid of, but something that we have to contend with and deal with, then we could perhaps approach this conversation with less fear. What will the transition look like? How will the transition prioritize workers? How do we ensure that people who have a particular need or need set have the basic needs covered? This requires innovation. This requires innovative thinking. And if we continue to just try to replace a future that we can, you know, only try to predict, but never really know, if we try to replace that with the system that we know so well, oh, yes, I'm still here, says my CLE credit. If we try to replace that with a system that we know, we will come short. We will think only in the limitations that we've had the opportunity to think through. I think the opportunity of a just transition in a new climate reality is to innovate something new and something better. I think this requires a new conversation on jobs versus labor. You know, is it that folks are seeking jobs, or is it that folks are seeking their basic needs to be met? And how willing are we to have that conversation outside of the politics, the big P politics, the actual conversation? What is it that we think we're offering folks when we say jobs? Is it poor wages and, you know, lots of hours or not enough hours to get benefits, or all of these games that we see playing in our economy? Like, why is that something to replicate? Why aren't we thinking broadly, more innovative around this? I think it's a false question, but I think there's a reality inside of the false choice, a false choice with a reality inside of it.
In there. That makes sense. No, that's wonderful. Doug, how about you? I mean, are there any specific examples that you can point to in your work where you've seen someone's livelihood going straight up against, you know, this train of change and climate change, and are, you know, needing to, you know, do something about this that, you know, you have tried to address in your life or your work?
Yeah, thank you so much. Alaska has been really probably one of the most exaggerated locations where we've seen how climate has impacted the environment, the people, the game, the vegetation. It's been an area that's probably been a looking glass into our future to what is in store for us, and has not been very good. So there has been a high inflection point here as it comes to our economy being centered around oil and gas versus our environment versus our livelihoods and subsistence. The question that you asked earlier of how we get people on board to have this conversation with us, I think Colette sort of hit it for me. A transition will happen. There will be change regardless of what we want, regardless of what we attempt to do. And so I've been trying to get people on board to, with the notion that this is going to happen. It happened to coal. It's happened to wagon wheel makers. It's happened to everybody in our history. The idea that it's not going to happen to us is just putting our head in the sand. So we have to be part of the solution. Areas that it has impacted Alaska has been in the game and the wildlife. You have the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge up in the North Slope of Alaska that was put out for permit and bid by the Trump administration. It's also the location of the porcupine herd, which is integral to the survival and the subsistence of the interior Athabascan Indians of Alaska. The population has been decimated. They're on the way back with support from environmental controls. But it's also very fearful that continuing to go on this road is going to really impact food security for people, going to impact our environment further, the vegetation. So there are many things that have gone on here in Alaska that just feel like it's so big, so important, and I feel like we're at the leading edge of it. So we are having this conversation on a daily basis. We have it in our legislature, we have it in our communities, and I have it within my own office as the IBEW, because I do also have people that fear this change. And that fear is not out of nowhere. When I mentioned coal, some of those jobs that came back to replace the coal did not come back in the areas where coal industry was lost. So people have concerns about where it's going to reemerge, where they're going to have to go to find it. And just like Colette, this is my home. This is my ancestors. For me to leave Alaska would be something more substantial than I can imagine right now. And it wouldn't be for a job. I would not be leaving for a job from my home here. So I've got to find a way to make it work here. I've got to find a way to convince people to get on board. And some of that has been some of the difficult conversation that this will happen to us and that this is going to be coming down the pipe, whether we want it or not. We must be part of the solution.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, that's wonderful. I don't want you to have to move either. I think that it's great that you both have kind of returned home. And I wonder, I think you both might have very different answers to this, but returning home, I mean, I know, Doug, you've been there, but being in a place where I'm wondering how you respond to Indigenous people, people of color, immigrants who might be hesitant to any kind of big organization effort that looks like a labor effort or that is associated with labor. Knowing, due to history, there have been some traditional labor unions that are on the wrong side of history, right? The wrong side of progress. And, remember when unions were racist and, were part of the problem of institutionalized racism. How do you address hesitancy that might see this is not the answer to kind of organize and create these allies with labor unions, right? They're the problem.
Yeah, we've actually made a lot of mistakes in our history. Some of that we've had to recognize and correct. Some of the things with civil liberties, that was part of our fabric when we were born into labor organizations over 100 years ago. So some of those fights we have been on the right side of, but we haven't always been correct, and we haven't always been honest with ourselves. What I share with people is my experience. Also with my family. My father, I mentioned earlier, he was an operating engineer. He lived with me for the last 6 years of his life due to mobility and other dementia, but he was no burden to me. He had his own retirement. He had health care, he had coverage. He had great dignity throughout his career, providing for his family. And then he had great dignity in retirement. So that's been my experience that I grew up with. And my experience as a member of my organization has been that this is one of the most democratic organizations to be a part of. We get to vote on everything. Majority carries the decisions, and I get to be involved and affect change that I want to see happen within my organization, which has been workforce development and outreach to communities for Alaskan Natives and other minority groups here in Alaska. And so we've been able to reflect our numbers with that, getting close to 15% Alaska Native in our apprenticeship programs. We've also probably got about 25% minority. We have increased our women in the trades by probably 20% in the last 5 years. So there's a lot of things that I can point to that are outcomes that have been wonderful, that we've been a part of, but it's taken work, and it's taken minorities like myself to get in and to work with other people to make the change that we want to see happen.
Yeah, I really appreciate both that acknowledgement and that perspective, because I'm just hearing Doug talk about his father and the dignity that carries. I mean, down here in the South, where, you know, union busting happened a long time ago, and they're not very many, right? It's not a part of the economic fabric here. While there are unions around, they are still fighting to be inside of workplaces that are, you know, dominated by sort of major employers, because the South, this red block, is really a place where unions in general are fought against by corporations. So the question becomes even more interesting, because we have to hear about stories like Doug's to know what is possible, right? If we're successful in getting a livable wage, unionized jobs, which, you know, I'm really hopeful for in this new administration, if we're successful in getting that, there are other things to deal with after we get through that door. And this brings to mind for me a conversation that we've had since Katrina, which is, who can we work with? Who do we have to let in? Who has to be a part of this solution? And I'll tell you, with the climate crisis, the answer is clear. We're gonna need everybody. We're going to have to address past harms, and we're gonna have to acknowledge past harms, but we're also gonna have to have the fortitude and the rigor to move through it. So this is not just the sort of checklist acknowledgement and it never comes back up. This is the, whenever it comes up, we have to deal with it, because there is a legacy of harm. And the harm is not just from the unions and unionized work, it's from structural racism, it's from colonization, it's from lots of things. And so if we look at everyone as bringing in their own set of baggage and harm, and we acknowledge that we all have our own self work to do, right? A commitment to self-transformation, says the Hemes principles. Then we know that working with any union that we can is really about inviting examples and anecdotes and information on how we all live as dignified workers, which is not something that we have until we hear these stories about Doug and his father. So I unlike other social justice issues where I definitely see the reason to parse out certain actors, with climate, I don't think we have that choice. I think we're gonna have to pull everyone in. I think we're gonna have to work with folks who challenge us. And when it comes to the existence of the planet and the life on it, we're gonna have to move past a little bit of our own pain and ego to get to some solutions. I think that's what the moment is calling for. I wonder if we're ready to meet the moment.
Wow. I love that. That's a great answer. Both answers were really insightful. Thank you for that. I love that you are acknowledging that there is this real question of who can we work with, right? I mean, it is not just we're going to build solidarity across all of these movements. Not all movements are alike. And I wonder if you could provide a little bit of insight into if either of you have sort of, maybe Doug, this is more on your on the ground work, but what do you do when you have a person who sees these other issues as political, right? Political hot buttons that I don't want to touch because I'm interested in finding an advocate who will advocate for me and create my job and ensure that I have one for the next 20 years and that I get a pension. Why is this not distracting and outside the realm of what I have paid, you know, my dues to do?
Yeah, there is a whole lot of sentiment from my membership that they would prefer us to not be involved in politics, not be so out there with it. And that's a conversation that we have on a constant basis because we have to show and demonstrate to them why we're there. The honest truth for myself personally is I would I would rather not be involved as much as I am. I would rather for us to not be involved as an organization and having to contribute our collective dollars to help make influence. I would really prefer if everybody's money was out of it and politics came down to more civics versus fundraising and demonizing other people. But we have this conversation because we have to convince our people to vote in their interest, and their interest as far as their livelihood, as far as their future, as far as their families. And that's where this conversation has come to, is what is the future of Alaska? Is it going to continue down the industry that is actually on its way out regardless of what we do? Or are we going to try to look to the future and try to preserve some of our heritage and some of our history that is getting snuffed out because of climate change? A lot of things are shifting rapidly, whether it be by floods, permafrost melting, forest fires. We've had in the last 10 years, probably, I think 6 of the highest forest 5 years in the last 10 years in Alaska's history that we've marked. We've broken in the last 6 years, probably 40 some different temperature records, also rainfall and different types of stuff like that. If we're going to get back to what we used to be and what we strive to aspire to be, we have to make some tough decisions, and we have to have difficult conversations. And then we have to find a way to make sure that we find common ground with people. That way we can advance our interests together. We all have an interest in seeing the decline, seeing the climate change arrested. It has happened so rapidly, the effects are devastating. As I mentioned, whether it's parts of the land falling into the ocean or into the rivers, villages being completely relocated for hundreds of millions of dollars. The resources for building for stuff in a positive direction are spent rebuilding or relocating or repopulating areas that have been taken out through forest fires. Sorry to ramble on so much there, but that's a bit of where I got here.
Yeah, no, I didn't hear that as rambling at all. I think that's the scale of what we're dealing with. You know, like it's that big, it's that much. I hear that. And when I hear this question, you know, something comes to mind for me, which is, you know, the distinction between politics and governance. And I agree with Doug. I wish none of us had to use our groups, you know, for politics, right? That's where it becomes kind of nasty. That's where it becomes, for the average person, just like a place I'd rather not go. But there's a conversation here around governance, which I really attribute to a breakdown in our education system, which is how we understand democracy and what our role is in it. The truth of the matter is, if we're going to have a free nation, if we're gonna be this power, we're going to have to participate in the governance of it. And I think the unions are showing, Doug started off by saying we vote on everything. You know, it's a process. It's a lot of input. And some people really get mad about input and process, but listen to why. I mean, think about why. We have a society who would rather not govern itself. Then what has happened is corporate and colonial control has taken away your right and your duty to govern. And that means we have a weak spot in our democracy. And anytime we've got a weak spot in our democracy, other things can come and take over it. Politics, money, hate, fear. This is really, I think, where this country is right now. How do we build up a process of governance? How do we actually get communities to understand that the process of self-governance is not only good for you and something you should participate in, but it is necessary if we're going to claim to be moving toward a democracy. And so I really think about all of this as power, and how do we make sure that communities understand that engaging in decision-making in your local union, in your federal government, is about you asserting your power. And it's not just about that individualism. It's not that individual power. It's not just about that sort of, what can I do for my self-interest? We have the responsibility to manage a nation together, despite half of us not really liking each other. We have to manage a nation together. And so this means we necessarily have to engage in processes where we bring tension, we address tension, we work through tension, we vote to move, to move a step ahead, to move a step forward. It really takes a different kind of mindset than what we're producing right now out of our schools and out of our communities. Right now in South Louisiana, we're producing workers. The education system is terrible. The health system is terrible. Who has access to anything good is, you can bank it on the history of slavery in this region. You can see where this is going to go. But we have an opportunity as we are transitioning our economic system to transition all of our social systems to be more resilient for what we know is coming, but to be ready to govern better, to get better at the thing in the center of this, which is the way we manage our home, our economy, and the way we govern ourselves. So I think there's an opportunity here. It's not something that people have been taught to value or that they even like. It's sort of one of those things that you would just rather not anyway. I think the work now is to make sure that folks understand democracy is like sweeping a floor. You swept it today and you're going to have to sweep it tomorrow. And if you don't, it's going to pile up on you. And we got to keep the floor clean. So come back in and sweep it again. And that's really how we have to shift people's understanding of democracy being a vote every 4 years versus democracy being something you should practice with your union, with your church, with your community groups, and every 4 years.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I think that's, completely right. I love your analogy of sweeping a floor, and that makes sense to me. I wonder, and I think maybe you were kind of touching on this, and that part of it is, right, what the pipeline is, right? Like into job, what kind of workers are we producing? But if you are trying to get people to sweep this floor daily, I wonder if you sweep the floor if you're not, if you're still looking for breakfast, right? Like you never get there because your basic needs are not being met. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out which one comes first. And I guess I'm wondering to you, Doug, because one of the benefits of working in a union, right, is that you can, your membership is making a living wage, and that is the success of the union. Do you think you'd have success, or would you have more success with your membership if instead of saying we need money for the union's PAC because we're going to do some more political spending over here, if you borrowed Colette's language and said we need power, right, in governance, and the way we do this is through a PAC, because that's the way the other system is going to do it, and they're going to do it better than we ever could and with more money than we ever could. Is it just a semantics thing? Could we change the language and take out politics? And do you think you'd have success with that?
Yeah, I think there definitely is a room to approach it that way. One of the sayings that we apply here that's, I don't have it written on the wall, but it's some things that would be like on a wall, is to tell people and remind everybody that only you can claim your power. And you claim your power through your voice, you claim your power through your advocacy, you claim your power through your collective work with each other. We can call it collective bargaining for our contracts. But we pull other things collectively, even for our retirements. My local retirement plan is about 4,500 members. We're about a $2 billion pension plan. That affords us the ability to negotiate and get some of the best investors that we can hold them accountable for the best returns. And if they don't do it, we can find someone else that's lined up to accept our money. Collectively, there is power and there is strength in numbers. And the interesting part that I find is my membership goes from the furthest left to the furthest right people on the spectrum of politics that I have to deal with on a daily basis. People that enter our apprenticeship program come from broad economic, ethnic, geographic backgrounds. So we are somewhat of a, just a small microcosm of the United States, I feel like, and maybe a little more Alaskan as a whole population. But that offers us an opportunity to have the conversation with people that we disagree with, to have the insight of someone that we don't understand yet, and to try to find common ground, because we all have a similar mission. We have to work on these projects together. We have to live in the same communities. Our kids play on the same Little League teams, go to the same schools. So we have to find a way to close that gap and have the bridges so we can have the rational conversation to where needs are met. My basic needs are very similar to everybody else that's probably on this call, to my membership. We are by far more similar than dissimilar. And so finding those areas where we can overlap with each other to where our interests are the same and that we are going to push in the same direction to get the same goals collectively, we can achieve so many things, much more than I've been able to do individually. And so that's part of where I'm trying to focus my effort, is to find areas that we have our circles of interest overlapping each other, that we can align our efforts and make advancements that are way beyond my labor organization. Ultimately, my goals are to elevate the social and economic status of my community. I want my kids' friends to have good homes. I want their parents to have safe vehicles if my children drive with them. I want my school to have good classroom sizes that we can fund. I want the roads to be safe. Everybody has the same interest or similar interests as myself, and I've just got to find ways to overlap with them, figure out ways to engage our efforts together and to move forward. And I just think that there are so many different possibilities that we have collectively. And if we claim our power collectively, we can move mountains.
Yeah. That's great. That's wonderful. No, I was thinking, yeah, that sort of brings me into it, like maybe another question or thought on, or maybe it's just a point on intersectionality, like, right, like there are people who are socially conservative and socially, or you know, very liberal, I'm sure, that are members of your union, but they can be ideologically opposed on other issues and still probably, you know, maybe there's a hierarchy of issues. I don't know if that's even enough to say, right? When you say most of us are aligned on a lot of things, we all want basic needs met, right? And the idea of what we want, a community where, you know, like if we want, our children can grow up and stay and feel like they have a future there as well. You know, that stuff we really don't disagree on. Thank you for that, for both of you. I don't want to, I wonder if maybe I didn't mean to do this, but I don't want to say that, you know, economic justice, obviously, and social justice in terms of racial justice and climate change are, you know, working in separate silos. Obviously, they are working interconnectedly, and I don't want to make the, you know, come across as thinking I think that one is working against the other or anything like that. So that sort of brings me back to this, again, back to big questions with big answers that you might not have. And I'm just sort of wondering if we could brainstorm a little. If we are all in agreement that this transition is happening, how do we make it just? How do we make it equitable such that it is not the same groups of people who have been disenfranchised repeatedly in these kinds of economic changes? And maybe if you don't have the answer to that, because I know it's a big question, specific examples that you've seen work well in your area, in your community, that you said this is one answer to a small part of that question. You know, how do we fix this?
Well, you gotta love the equity question, because it's on everyone's mind now. And I have the honor of sitting on the Louisiana Governor's Climate Initiatives Task Force, which is one of the first of its kind. You know, remembering that Louisiana sits inside of a red block. We are, you know, known as an oil and gas state and a service industry state. And we are losing land at one of the fastest rates on the planet. We received the first federal dollars to relocate communities and indigenous tribes off of land that is being lost to sea level rise. We are in 2020, we were in the cone of uncertainty 11 times with a record-breaking hurricane season. We have already had an Arctic extreme weather blast across this region that is still threatening water access to people in Mississippi and North Louisiana. I mean, this is real and it's happening. And the question of moving on equity is even at the forefront of a state like Louisiana as it considers what to do around this climate reality. For me, for us, equity requires a few important elements. One is the acknowledgement of past harms. The acknowledgement of past harms within a solution for a future action. So this means we can't just start with this sort of equality of distribution or equality of action approach. Instead, we have to go for an equality of benefits at the end and an equality of outcomes. So how do we, with a solution, bring the mismatched disparities to alignment? how can the work that we do now help to address the past harms that have left communities outside of this balanced line. In COVID, we saw the Harvard study look to Louisiana and say the morbidity rate of people who live next to who live next to petrochemical facilities, the morbidity rate in COVID is higher. And we know that environmental racism has put these facilities next to Black communities and poor communities and brown communities across the nation. And so what happens when we're making a solution around this pandemic? How do we address these folks who have an exposure, a risk that they didn't create? How do we as a nation prioritize and identify past harms as we build these solutions going out? I was hopeful that COVID was going to present an opportunity for us as a nation to really start asserting those equitable practices. I have been saddened as I've watched vaccines, as I've watched access to health, that we haven't figured that out yet. We don't have much more time. This climate crisis will reach a point of no return in less than 9 years, and really probably shorter than that. That's what the international community can agree on, which means it's a conservative estimate. So we have 9 years or less to figure out how to transform our systems into equitable systems that offer solutions that acknowledge past harm and address a growing climate reality. This is not going to be easy, because it's going to require folks who don't know that they have had privilege and benefits to actually do a little bit of self-examination and understand where they have, and understand why they will fit in a particular place in the line, as opposed to where their individualism and their privilege just assumes they should be. So this is not an easy question, but it is the question. Otherwise, at best, all we will get is a new system, a renewable energy system, a clean energy system, full of all of the oppressive methodologies that we see in the dirty energy system. So we've got to be able to make that shift. And I think the first part is defining equity in places like Louisiana with the Governor's Task Force, really defining how a definition of equity can be manifested on top of recommendations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save our economy and shift our community, but with a real acknowledgement that change is inevitable. It's happening and we've got to engage.
Well, I'm sorry, I got to follow that up. I don't have anything close to that. But what I can share a little bit about is my experience here in Alaska, coming from the trades and coming from the field, working with people that would be just considered blue collar, what our daily lives are like as far as what our worries and concerns are. And I think the biggest prohibitor of people getting on board with this transition and trying to be part of the positive momentum versus trying to obstruct it is fear. And fear comes from a lot of different places. It comes from a lack of preparation. It comes from concern that maybe there will be jobs, but they might not be the good jobs. There is privilege that was mentioned just a second ago. And the jobs that we're talking about oil and gas here in Alaska, they are probably on the upper end of the median for earnings and benefits. The idea that those will be displaced and not replaced, we come down to maybe a third, possibly a quarter of the earning power, and that is without a doubt paralyzing people from wanting to move. The fear has caused them to fear change more than to fear the consequence of not changing, and the consequences of not changing we're already experiencing. And I somewhat fear the idea that we're going to experience the consequences as well as not prepare and still face a tough transition because we haven't done the work to get ready for it. I think the biggest thing that I've tried to convey to people is we are going to have to address this at some point. This afternoon, tomorrow, next week, the transition is coming. If we can collectively work together, we can try to be part of something that we can make sure that there is equity and organizing involved to give power to the workers that can bargain for themselves, that they can try to create a structure that is going to be living wages, decent wages that they can be comfortable in, benefits that they can provide their families and go forward in the future. I'm a father of 5. Construction does have a bit of boom and bust. There is quite a bit of transiency in it, and so there is some comfort in there, but not when you're talking about a whole industry possibly shifting and maybe going out from underneath their feet. And that's been my perspective here. That's my conversations in my break room and the lunch rooms, is people's concern that they are going to be left behind, that the world will pass them by without a life raft left for them. And that's something I'm trying to convince them that we can change that. We can be a part of something that will ensure that we will claim our own power and give ourselves our own life raft to get to the next island.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I hear you saying, like, we can change that. We can do the work. And I again, I sympathize with people who have that fear that jobs will be, displaced and replaced with something that's not as good. My thought is also, my thought has to do with, what about the fear that is not that the jobs won't be as good, but they won't be for me. And that kind of leads me towards training. And I have kind of a more specific question. I guess I'm wondering whose job it is to do this work. Do you put this on yourself as organizations? Is it your job to train workers to make sure that we can fit within this economy? Is it again, does it go back to governance? Is it a larger question? Is it an individual thing? Are we, it's your job to go out and make sure you have these skills, just like it was your job, Doug, to make sure you got into, the apprenticeship a while back. Who does this front end work and make sure it's done before it's too late?
So on my side of things, we have taken that responsibility a few years back. We've expanded our training. We've gone to our international and looked at our curriculum for apprenticeship and selected more core blocks. That we've got solar panels at our school. This summer, I'm installing a solar array on my building here in my office. My hometown village of Cantwell, I installed 2 windmills for the community center. It's about 300 people live there, tiny compared to where you guys are from. But these are things that we've taken that responsibility because this is our industry. This is what we do, and we want to be on the cutting edge of it for all sorts of different types of technology. But we don't want to do it alone, and we are trying to gather partners and trying to find different groups that can help us out into doing this, because we want to expand this beyond our membership. We're looking to expand this to our community and to our state. We've looked to our state for partnering with state technical vocational education programs, TVEP. We've also looked at the federal government to try to find ways, and maybe it was going to be in a transportation bill possibly coming up, infrastructure, sorry, or what had been the COVID relief bill. Different ways that we were going to look to try to find projects that we can get going on, but also training opportunities to help build those projects and renewable resources here in Alaska that will help us transition away from our economy that is going away. And I'll just share this, that I don't know what they are in Ohio. I believe a lot of folks are in Ohio. Here in Fairbanks, for the way we generate our power, we are a natural gas and oil rich state, but we don't have any refineries. My electricity cost is about 26 cents a kilowatt hour. We pay about $2.50 for home heating fuel a gallon. The industry has gone away, but it's also part of what we have been surviving on and what we also need to move away from, because it is cost prohibitive. It is bad for our environment. The interior part of Fairbanks, where I live, has so many days of bad oxygen, poor polluted air due to our generation of heat, power, and wood smoke throughout the community. Thank you.
And I
Coming in.
No, you can go. I was
Okay.
going to say
We're
that
back.
we're about a Q&A time, but Colette, please go ahead and
No,
respond.
yeah, I'm gonna.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. I was just thinking about the question, is it our job? This really was the life-changing moment for me. That was Katrina and then the BP oil drilling disaster. Before those 2 events, I would say, no, my job was my family. My job was me. My job was making sure I know what's going on. But I quickly saw what climate disaster recovery really meant for communities like mine, Black and Native and poor and rural, and what that meant when you didn't have access to things, what that means when the laws are written for the middle class and the mainstream. And I slowly began to understand that my role as an attorney wasn't just to represent a company in its ethical profit making, but instead to advocate on behalf of communities that were being targeted, marginalized, and purposefully left out of processes that had to do with their own welfare. And so now the answer to the question is yes, it's our job. It's our job to educate everyone. It's our job to tell everybody everything. The problem is when you try to do that by yourself, you will, one of two things will happen. You'll either get the savior complex, like only you can be the person to do it, or you'll burn yourself out. And this gets us to methodologies and philosophies rooted in bottom-up organizing and grassroots organizing and building power from the ground up. And this is something where I really do respect the unions. I think they've got a technique and a principled approach to bottom-up organizing. And I think folks who are not unionized but are working for social justice movements across this nation also use this technique. I think of Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a champion of this, who's saying, no one's free until everybody's free. We've got to move with the ground before we see changes at the top. And so we have been in the Gulf South since 2015, moving for a collective response to the climate crisis, not because we're focused on workers, but we're focused on communities, and communities include workers. They include musicians, they include caretakers, they include children, they include elderly and disabled. What does our future mean for everyone, and what are our roles? And together we can figure this out. In 2019, we launched Gulf South for a Green New Deal, where we took a national conversation and we tailored it to the South. And now we have 5 states moving together around a vision for the Gulf South, the 5 Gulf South states. But it is not, it's not like we have all the answers immediately. We've come together through this governance, collective governance, to build and practice democracy. But all of that is leading to solutions. What do we want to do? How do we want this to work? And like Doug, we live in a red block here, and everybody is not politically aligned, and that's not the goal, really. We don't need political alignment. We need an agreement to a collective vision, and we need an agreement towards working toward that vision. Yeah. So yes. I think the answer is yes, it's our job, it's our duty, it's our work. It's something I believe in. It's something I had to learn to believe in. I had to move from that individual mindset back to the community and that village mindset, which I think has been assimilated out of many of us, and I hope we will choose to go back to, because I think COVID has shown us that we're connected, whether we want to admit it or not. The collective health of this planet will be the determinant for you and your family and how you live. So yes, we have to tell everyone we have to do it, but we don't have to do it alone, and we don't have to be the ones always out front. Sometimes you can activate and collectivize in a way that really brings more leaders into the conversation.
Wonderful. Sorry about that. I jumped out for a minute, but I'm now back. And I've been not a great moderator, and then I'm sorry I have not gotten your questions, but I will. Some of them I know I can answer just by typing, so I will, and so I'll jump around a little bit. One of them that I think maybe, Colette, you have answered a little bit, maybe you want to add something to it. And that was related to Doug's point about influence of money. What do you feel is a lawyer's role in building solidarity in movements and mobilizing votes, if lawyers should have any role at all?
I love it. And let me say with love to all of the law students and lawyers listening, our first role is to learn how to be quiet and to move the ego out of the way, and everything that we've been taught in law school about how elite we are, about how solution oriented our brains can go. It is actually a level of oppression that community does not need to start off with. But we do have a role. We have a role because we're seeing injustice. We see injustice in permits. We see injustice in recovery. We see injustice in who gets jobs and who gets fired. So we have a role to play, but it is not the role of taking over, taking charge, and telling people what to do. That, my friends, is the mindset that we have to all dismantle. That is the colonized mindset that we're taught in law school. And we have to sort of relearn that we have a small role to play in a large movement, which is not the same thing as being out front in a small action.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a great answer. I think that also probably goes in line with another question we had from Nathan on the board, which is, you know, with all of these barriers in mind that think of lawyers as being kind of, you know, parts of the problem, right? Working for the system. You know, what is the key to building this trust of people who are understandably skeptical? Is it just to listen? Is it just to be quiet and listen?
I mean, it's honestly, it's to get our skills ready to work for the side of good. We are initiating a just transition lawyering network with the University of California at Irvine, and we hope to work with many folks at the Ohio State University Law School and many other law schools across the nation to set up a just transition lawyering network that is doing all sorts of things: filing climate litigation, defending human rights protectors and water protectors who are challenging permits that are going next to Black and brown and poor communities. It's not the same thing, though, as moving on those things alone. You've got to find the movement that's working around these issues and say, when do you need me? Call me in. Tap me when you're ready. It's not the same thing as a lawyer just filing suit because they see an issue that they can win. This is not about the legal win. A legal remedy is not a movement win. And that's the part that we have to really get our heads around, because we've been taught if you win the case, you win. But that's not how this goes. And it is not how it's playing out for community. And this is really about our own ego and about us really playing our part. So it's self, you got to do a little self work, and then you got to bring your fire. And you use your fire on behalf of the community, because they need us to be warriors, and we are. Look at us. Look at who we are. We like to fight. We like to argue. We like to challenge, and tension does not bother us. Our community needs us to show up, but we can't come throwing fire at the community. We've got to control it and use it where it's necessary.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, it's not always about the win, right? Sometimes it matters how you win too, even if it is about the win in terms of building the movement. We are in common law. Sometimes you now have won, but you have really moved the movement backwards 10 years. But I got another one on the chat, and I think it's great for both of you maybe to kind of opine on. How has COVID changed your strategies in approaching this work? And maybe I'll even broaden it out. I mean, how has COVID changed? I mean, it changed everything. How did it change your life and how you do your day-to-day work?
So I'll just be real quick on that one. It really has brought things back to a little bit more community. We've had more discussion on what our responsibility is to each other, what our responsibilities to our neighbors and the rest of our town. There's been a lot of heartburn over some of the things that have gone on, and not to get into those types of things, but COVID has brought us back to, it slowed our world down a little bit and brought us back to a little bit of community here in Alaska, I feel like. Definitely the impacts were economical, the impacts were health. Personally, my father passed away from it 2 months ago. It was something that we spent a long time trying to avoid. It didn't quite work out for us. So from my 2-year-old to my 86-year-old dad, it got every one of us, all 7 of us in the house, or 8 of us, sorry. But COVID has also brought us to a spot that I think we see some hope and opportunity, with so many large issues in front of us. When here in Alaska, environmental, climate, economical, jobs, industry, it seems like it's overwhelming, but it also seems like it's one of the biggest opportunities, because these have so much overlap with each other and they intersect at so many points that they have to move together. And to your point earlier, as you talked about, they're not in silos. They're huge issues that are on their own, involve a great deal of discussion, insight, and studying, but they tie together so much that they have to be addressed together, and people have to be involved in it to make sure that their interest is not being left out.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, Doug, sorry, quick follow-up, do you think that the idea of COVID has strengthened the, I guess, resolve in union work? I mean, my thought is, I don't know if everyone thought day to day how little voice everyone had in the workplace who's not unionized. I mean, have you had people that are not in a union who have come up to you and said, wow, I had no idea that this, you know, could be so costly and so dangerous? Or is it mostly people were already on the side? And
no, there's been a great number of our people that a lot of our folks on a day-to-day basis you know, as they go through life and their jobs and so on and so forth, they don't really have that much interaction with the local. They're never in jeopardy. They never have anything that are really that big of concern. They just sort of kind of go through. A lot of those people have come back and said, wow, I'm so glad we're part of this, because we were able to do so many things in the policies and procedures of how the how the business dealt with COVID and how they dealt with our members in safety and the controls and safeguards that were put into place. So a lot of our people didn't fully recognize the strength of what they were part of and didn't realize the benefits that they had from it. That was demonstrated this last year in a great deal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but we're at time. I don't want to cut you all off because you're really fascinating speakers. And this is really just like a really great conversation, but we're at time. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I mean, the time and energy you gave today are privileges that you afforded us. So we can't be any more grateful that you gave us some of your time and energy to have these conversations, including you, Professor Roser-Jones, for moderating and doing an excellent job.
It's my pleasure. Thank you both. Zooming in and having this conversation with me. And I feel I have a lot more faith in the movement, knowing that you both are on the ground, and I'm feeling like maybe we can get this all done. So thank you, Megan. Thank you to all of our participants. My sincere apologies if I didn't get to your question. I will stay a couple more minutes and see if I can type in answers. But if not, my email's online. Shoot me an email and I will get it to our panelists and see if they will be gracious enough to get your answer. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, and have a great weekend.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, and for everybody, we are going to take about like a 15-minute break before we have the next panel, which will be industrial work, gig work, and work at the margins.